if you can find out what are their KPIs that they will, if they hit, will be promoted, then that is the biggest shortcut to truly understand what motivates them.
Welcome to the Marketing Academy podcast by GCMO, where in every episode we sit down with a marketing expert to deep dive into a hot topic shaping the industry. I'm Yitzy Tannenbaum. Let's get started.
Welcome to the Marketing Academy podcast by GCMO. I'm Yitzy Tannenbaum, and today we have a good one for you. Today we have Rafi Mendelsohn, the CMO at Cyabra.
Bingo, nailed it.
Yeah. At Cyabra, going into some really cool stuff around NASDAQ listing. That's his big activity. That's not the topic for today, although it could be a quite interesting topic, how to prepare a company for a NASDAQ listing, although I think it's a little niche. Not many marketers have chances to do it often.
Aspirational.
But we will talk a little bit about trust and trust-led growth, what that is, what that means, hopefully giving you guys tangible insights on how to do that. But Rafi, tell us a little bit about you, how you ended up in this crazy world of marketing.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.
Really excited to be here. I suppose the first, as you can hear from the accent, gives it away, born and raised in London. And the first half of, or just under the first half of my career was working in London at marketing communications agencies. And I had amazing opportunities to work with some of the biggest brands in the world from the London office, working in the corporate and tech teams with IBM, Oracle, FedEx, Philips, all around the world. Really global campaigns, really, really fun. And also working at an agency is a fantastic education because you have to be able to manage all the pressures and be able to wear different hats all within the same day. You have numerous clients and trying to understand the topic areas and understand what their needs are. And then the second half, or just over the second half, has been working in-house at startups. And so I worked at various different startups at various different stages, but mostly early stage. And the aim is always to scale them and take them globally. And I've done that a couple of times, like at MyHeritage, where they were there for 4 and a bit years. Amazing company to work at, amazing Israeli company. And they were acquired by private equity. And now at Cyabra over the last 4 years, fascinating space, working in the disinformation area, of working with governments and brands to track disinformation. I'm a storyteller. I enjoy telling stories. I enjoy doing that. And then over years, I've added more and more marketing hats until eventually, by accident, found myself as CMO of Cyabra. And impending NASDAQ listing as well and all. So it's been a fun journey so far.
Good luck with the listing. Now, you mentioned storytelling, and trust tends to be kind of the cornerstone of a story, right? If I don't trust the teller and what they're telling me is true and accurate, then you're missing something in the story. So why is trust important in telling stories? And then, I guess, why is trust important to brands?
So I think the words trust and genuine, authenticity, I don't think there's new buzzwords in our field. But something I've noticed over the last few months, and I think that's wearing a marketer's hat, but also over the last few years, immersing myself in the world of disinformation, where it's just grown exponentially. And something I've noticed past few months, past year or two, is how the lowering of trust across society is impacting the way that us as marketers can operate and the limitations plus all the opportunities. And so I've definitely seen trust across society is falling. Sometimes when we talk about disinformation, it's often quite negative and people are like, oh, wow, I'm scared for the rest of the world. That's not the point of this conversation. But definitely I've noticed how across all kinds of measures, trust in societies is going down. And Edelman do great work around this, the Edelman Trust Barometer. They've been doing this for 25 years. And they actually, as of the last year, they put this down to a crisis. 70% of the global population look at leaders and believe that they are trying to manipulate them or they're trying to lie to them. And that's, politicians, business leaders. And so it's important that us as marketers understand that that's the view which we're operating, and we see this as well in the way that within the marketing space, the way that people like Mark Ritson is talking about the importance of brand building. You also have in the spicier corner people like Clark Barron, for whoever's following him on LinkedIn, and all the kind of topics around all of these tools and the amount of data being consumed and how much data do they need. I think personally, for me, I noticed it, and it kind of began around the Cambridge Analytica scandal. So that was March 2018. I was working at MyHeritage, right? Genealogy, DNA kits, hugely popular. And then March 2018 happened. Cambridge Analytica, companies working with Facebook and taking huge amounts of data, more than was necessary, and then being able to use that to manipulate their audiences. And then all of a sudden, from I want to take a DNA kit, or yes, I'm going to show you information about my family so that I can find out more about my roots. All of a sudden it turned into, well, you've got my data. What are you going to do with that? And so I think that the kind of general perception, or the audience out there that we are trying to sell to, that we're trying to get their attention, there is an increase or a lack of trust. And that's something I've seen both from the professional side as a marketer and have plotted, but also it's been fascinating in the world of Cyabra and disinformation, how you've seen the way that social media is being, and the explosion of disinformation tactics. And so it's with those two hats, with those two perspectives, that I kind of come to this. But obviously it's not just about creating problems, it's what's the solution, and how do we as marketers navigate that, because there is a huge opportunity. I think that sorry.
Right. That's a really interesting, and I probably agree that there is a lack of trust and people are trusting less. I'm curious to know, do you know why that is? Why are people less trusting today than in the past?
Wow. That's a huge question.
Hey, I didn't tell you that this going to be easy. Softball. You want softball questions?
I think it's a whole range of different factors and societal. I think social media is part of that, and also, just generally what we're seeing. I think people tend to be angrier. People tend to be more emotionally focused or more polarized in terms of politics, in terms of our society. I think we spend less time with other people and have less opportunities to open ourselves up to different experiences and different kinds of audiences. And within social media in particular, we live in these echo chambers increasingly. And I think, I don't think there'll be many people that disagree with that in terms of that. But then I think because of that, it's becoming more of an us versus them. Plus, to put my Cyabra hat back on, the way that conversations on social media are being manipulated in order to either it's to change people's, who they're going to vote for, right? That's the kind of often thought about. But actually, more and more, the adoption of AI by malicious actors has increased the ability for malicious actors to just get people angry. And sometimes that's the objective. Get people angry, get people more distrusting in society. And that's kind of, as a society, I know it's a big idea, a big thought, and how does that apply then to marketing? I'm sure, we are going to come to that. But I think that's kind of where it stems. But I think we see that really practical examples in terms of the trends that are most prevalent in marketing. We see threads of that, right? Whether you sit in the demand gen or lead gen conversation, I think everyone accepts that, the ability for people to put in their email address to download something, we're all a bit more reticent, right? The additional filters that Google have put in terms of email, and the filtering in terms of spam, and I don't know, I haven't asked for this email, and so the penalization of that and the way that that's affected us, the kind of GDPR rules that have come in aimed to protect data, and it's all around that, and also within AI, right? The data points that seem to be more prevalent or seem to have the biggest influence in terms of the LLMs and their ingestion of data. Reddit, LinkedIn, PR articles, all of those are geared around trust mechanisms, or they have a higher perception of trust, right? LinkedIn, we have our community, so that's where it takes it from. Reddit was built on that community base, and so therefore it's not a coincidence, I believe, that the LLMs are ingesting that information and then prioritizing that first. And also as well, something that's come up in this podcast many times, of that founder-led thought leadership, right? That's not by accident. That's because who are we more likely to trust? Someone that we see their face, or is it going to be a kind of a generic logo where why should I take their opinion? I don't know who's on the other side of that platform or the other side of that that thing that I'm digesting. And so we see that so many different examples, so many different strands of conversations that we're having within the marketing world. But I believe it's all down to this trust, this need, or this searching for of trust of something that marketers have to gain now from our audience.
Right. And it's probably because there's abundance of also information out there, right? There's so much. And
Completely.
And also 2/3 or 90% of the content that we're consuming today is inauthentic, is AI generated. And I think we're just desperate for real.
Mm.
We're thirsty to trust in something. And I think we just get disappointed over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So that's what we are looking for on Reddit, on LinkedIn. When you see those overly polished posts that were so obviously written by AI, and then just someone comes up and he or she are frustrated about something, and they put that frustration into poorly worded sentences. There's something there that creates empathy, and I believe it. I empathize with it, as opposed to the doom scrolling of endless kind of abyss of content. So it's a difficult. It's easier said than done, right? For brand, because I think we're most skeptic of brands. I think it's the hardest to why, because they want my money, right? So the airline or the credit card company or wherever it is, they are the least trustworthy. And especially if your brand is just like a regular, if you're selling shoes or t-shirts or whatever it is, how do you start going about building that trust?
Well, I think even a step before that is what you said, is that realizing that that's what people are looking for in this world, increasingly in this world of inauthenticity. I think the thing that is becoming more scarce is then something that's genuine, authentic. And so let's start from there, do more of that, right? And so that we're going to get into the tactics of how that happens and how we do this and how we build genuine, authentic brands, or even more importantly, lead generation machines, because this isn't just about brand building, right? This trust is not, that conversation is not just about that. But I think that's, as marketers, we need to recognize that we have more tools than ever. We have an ability to 10x, 100x the kind of content we're creating. And then before we do, is this something that should go out? Is this actually adding value? Is this something that, because that's what people are looking for. The whole kind of dark social, right? Why is this happening? Is because there is a lack of trust. But when we do find our communities, those are the people that we go to. And that in a way that we no longer, just as consumers generally, but also the way that we buy, especially B2B, we don't want 10 options anymore, right? We go to AI search and say, okay, tell me which is the one that I should be using. There are lots of people, and we still generally trust the AIs to tell us and give us a reason. Maybe they're telling us the breaking down why we should trust them and why they're good. But when we do find those communities like our WhatsApp and our Slack groups, we're going there. And so for marketers, we have to understand that that's the opportunity that we have in front of us. And over the last few years, with that in mind, and also knowing that I've been working at a disinformation company where even more so we have to approach things in an authentic way. We've kind of developed this approach, not revolutionary. It's just, I suppose, putting different pieces together, but it's with trust at the beginning, at the forefront of that conversation. And it's interesting that as marketers, there isn't really a KPI to establish trust, to track trust. It's a very hard thing to be able to do, but it's something that shouldn't just live within marketing or be seen as an objective. It should be seen, especially enterprise brands, right? Enterprise companies, there's so many different touch points across the company. One of those breaks down and you lose that trust, then all of that goodwill, all of those different touch points, all of that points where you've engaged with marketing, you've come to a podcast or a webinar, you've engaged with the sales team. Okay, now you're, now you're a customer. And if at any point that conversation and of that funnel, then and the trust breaks down, you've lost it. You've got to start pretty much from the beginning. And so that's kind of where we need to realize that it's not just a marketing thing. And it's, I think, dare I say, I think Israeli companies are particularly bad at recognizing the need for trust, or recognizing or identifying the fact that actually that does start from trust, or that your audience distrusts you even before they've met you more than ever, right? They distrust those tactics of spamming it out, or maybe there's outbound. Again, there's a good place for outbound, but how we approach that has to adjust.
Right. And trust probably if you don't have trust, you could have the best ebook or the best video or the best webinar or the best podcast. If the person on the other end doesn't trust you, or right, it'll be worth nothing. So yes, we can't measure trust, but if you can't establish that, then you won't see any results, I think, right? And we're talking about marketing, and marketing is a focus and the spear of this. But I think this also goes back to the product itself. If I can't trust the Cyabra product to give me what I expected to give me, then I'm not going to pay money for it.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's one of the biggest gaps that distrust has created in that funnel, is that, okay, well, the marketing doesn't align to when I come to a demo, or when it comes to understanding exactly what the solution is. It's like, wait a minute, I've read everything so far. You've told me that you do this, and then when it comes to that, and that's one of the things that we, people see regularly, but that all feeds into that process of understanding that trust, which company you're going to go for and who's going to recommend you, and it is all based off of that, and it touches upon the founders and how they conduct themselves. It touches upon the product. It really is something that difficult to track. I don't know how to track it. If any listeners or viewers know how to do that, then please reach out, because I would love to hear that. If there's a metric that can wrap all of that together, that would be incredible to be able to do that.
Right. It's funny, like, as we're talking, I'm trying to think about me as a consumer and how I choose to buy something, right? Let it be an article of clothing or a sandwich at a restaurant. There is, somewhere deep inside, I'll trust one over the other. And it's not always the most well-known brand. It's not always the biggest brand. It's not always the most boutique. There's no one size fit all, but there's always that one brand that resonates with me that I'm like, I really like them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not usually because the quality of the product. It's just, it's something there. And I assume that this is a brand that built this relationship with me over many, many years, right? I think obviously the go-to example is both Apple and Coca-Cola, of companies who've built a relationship with an audience. And everyone has an opinion about Apple.
Mm-hmm.
Good, bad, whatever it is. They've created that relationship over the time that grew into trust or distrust or whatever it is. But I don't think trust is in life, but also when it comes to marketing, trust is not built overnight, right? You need it. There's a journey that you have to take a customer through, and it could take years. But once you have that trust, by the way, you'll have customers going, or champions going from company to company and bringing you in because they know you, they love you, they have that relationship.
Completely. And I think trust is that the biggest commodity. It's the hardest to achieve, but I think once you've done that, or if you can show yourself in that, then that can be your biggest moat. And it's important to say that there is a really interesting debate around short-term sales execution, lead generation versus longer term brand building, right? Really great research from the Ehrenberg Institute. I'm probably mangling that name. Happy to put that in the comments. And they've done some really good stuff of the long term brand building versus the short term sales execution, and the 95-5, right? That 5% are in market as your buyers, and the rest of the 95% are not in market right now, and they're looking to be educated as opposed to buying. And so therefore, don't put all of your eggs in that 5%, or go for the right tactics to the right people. There's a really interesting debate to be had about that. This is not that. You can trust should be also a short-term, and can be a short-term sales led activity. This isn't a kind of nice fuzzy feeling, and we're going to get to the practical about some of the ways that we've personally found success to do that. But it's very important that's not what we're saying here, that this is, in 2-3 years time or in 10 years time you could be like a Coca-Cola and develop trust. No, we're still living in reality of today. As marketers, we have more pressures, lowering budget, less resources. Oh, you can just AI that, don't worry. Okay, how do you do that then? And how do you do that? But how do you do that with trust at the center of that? So that's not what this conversation is, but for sure is important to recognize that.
You could just AI it. I like that term. Right. So hopefully we set a way too high expectation from our audience of what we're going to try to achieve in this episode. But yeah, so Rafi, maybe let's go. I think we've hit that point of, okay, I don't think we'll find much pushback on trust isn't important, or we don't need trust, or trust is not something I want to build with my audience. So where do I start? What's that look like?
So what we did is we, Cyabra, and over the last few years, and different companies I worked at, is okay. With that in mind, how do we then turn that into content that is educational, informative, answers a question, answers a pain point, and then how do you build that out as a kind of content machine, but then also as well focus just as much on the distribution. And so this kind of trust-led growth engine is something that's worked really, really well for us. And that really starts with who is your audience, right? That's, not the first time you're going to hear a marketer on this podcast say that question of who trust start with your audience. Of course, depending on the stage you're at, try to go narrower, right? Or at least for this exercise, try and go narrower. And I know there's always the temptation to go as wide as possible because you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket and you want to, but try to go narrow because that really allows you to be able to go deep into their challenges, deep into their pain point, and then you can create that content and that educational materials and develop that trust with that audience. And then you can replicate that to as many different audiences depending on what your resources is. So that's kind of start with that, right? Let's call them Sarah or Steve. And the way that I like to think about it is let's put Sarah or Steve in the middle of a piece of paper, right? And then let's try and map out as much as possible who they are. And I don't mean demographics, because that's something that we should now all avoid as marketers. Have you seen the King Charles versus Ozzy Osbourne demographics data? How that they are, for anyone who hasn't seen it, it's amazing. If you were to follow demographics of how marketers, maybe do it now, maybe used to do it, of, okay, what's their age and where do they live? And there's an amazing graphic of King Charles on one side, Ozzy Osbourne, the punk rock star, and they are both born in the same year. They both live in a castle. They both have 3 kids. There's a couple of other things. And basically, if you were to follow that, then your audience would both be simultaneously King Charles and Ozzy Osbourne.
Right. There are 5 or 6 criteria that are super specific that are answered in both personas.
So if you think you've cracked the code because you know what their age is, you know which university they're at, whatever it is, avoid that. So what I'm talking about, though, is who are they in terms of what their interests are, where they live, and I don't mean stalk outside their home. I mean, where do they go online? Who do they follow online? Which groups are they in? If they go to a conference or 2 a year, which are the ones that they go to? Which are the industry publications? Everything. Which podcasts do they listen? And really try and understand around your Sarah or Steve, whoever your Sarah or Steve is, try and understand exactly who they are. And that involves real listening. And it's not just, I really want to challenge people, this isn't just about joining the demo call or getting a recording of the demo call, or even putting the demo call through the transcription through AI. That's good. Definitely try and extract the pain points from that. But actually listen, set up time for the marketing team to ask those questions, because that sales demo and the opportunity to speak to your audience is a completely different conversation. And asking for people's time, even just 10-15 minutes of your time, you do enough of that, 10 to 20 of those conversations, then you'll really be able to map out who they are, where they live, what's their ecosystem look like, and exactly who they are. And that's incredibly important to do that listening piece. And it might sound like an obvious point, but it's incredible how many teams don't do that. And they should set themselves a challenge, and then also share all of the learnings with other departments, with the product team, with the product marketing team, whoever it is. So learn everything about them, not in a demographics case, but in terms of what ticks them, what gets them ticking, and where they live.
Right. I think all marketers know that they need to do this, but you kind of get into life and you have all these things to do, and the company's listing on NASDAQ in a few weeks, and I got to get this PR right. And just because it's not a mission critical, and it's just kind of, we keep on pushing it off. So I'm a big fan, but I do want to add at least my perspective when it comes to customer conversations. Is I in addition to all the things you mentioned, I also very much like to look for what I call the motivation. What is this person waking up in the morning doing? What are they show up to work? What are they looking to achieve? What is that one kind of North Star and it's usually a feeling. It's how do I feel in this situation relative to the product, right? If it's a car, if it's a piece of clothing, right? You sell t-shirts. This person at this age, in this place of this social demographic background, wants to prove that they're successful, right? So they want their clothing to reflect that. So I want this shirt to tell a story of success. And again, no matter the product and who the audience is, but that's what I'm usually trying to look for is what is that deep feeling that if I could connect to, then it's just going to be like, oh my God, this brand is talking to me.
Absolutely. And in the B2B space, that's even easier, because I remember when I had IBM on back in agency side, when IBM as a client, someone gave me the best advice that has always stuck with me, because they were a retained client, but there would also always be lots of different projects that you would pitch for. And so you would work with these various different people within IBM who were in-house, and we were the agency serving them. And someone said, as well as the objectives of this project or of the brief, if you can find out what are their KPIs that they will, if they hit, will be promoted, then that is the biggest shortcut to truly understand what motivates them. Not just their pain point, right? You can also get to that. That's also incredibly important. But what's their personal pain point? And there will be a matching up, right? It won't be, okay, I need to make the best coffee. And it will be aligned with what their role is. But if you can work out what is it that they need within the next 12 months to get their promotion, and you try and it's kind of the thing, you have to develop a bit of a relationship in order to, over a beer and try and really understand after the first couple of calls, and try and understand. If you can understand what is it that they need to hit to get their promotion, then the ability, and this really works obviously in the B2B space, is your ability to align for that in order to gain their trust. You'll have their trust. If they know that you are the superpower that has propelled their career, going back to IBM, right? This gaining trust is not necessarily a brand new idea, right? In the 70s, it was with IBM that said, you never get fired for buying IBM. I'm not even sure if IBM came up with it themselves, but it was this term that they were happy to ride the back on. And that really goes to that kind of trust. So really understanding what their pain points are. At Cyabra, we as a team, it was pretty painful, involved lots and lots of coffees and breaks, but we did a really deep dive, it was a couple of years ago, into the job descriptions, not the AI generated job description, but the actual job descriptions of open positions of our target audience. Because in those job descriptions, it says, these are your responsibilities. You are going to be responsible for A, B, and C. And if you understand what they're responsible for, how they're being assessed, whether they've done a good job or not, that's your shortcut, right? That's how you get into really understanding what their personal pain point is, as well as obviously understanding the company. So there's a few different ways you can do it, but if you don't know it, don't guess, right? Ask them, have that conversation, and really, really speak to them.
And then there's something of just talking to by the way, I did spend a few years at IBM, and I know the IBM culture and world very well, kind of where they were and where they are today. But yeah, understanding. And I will say that I think in the world of LLM, when you can analyze hundreds, thousands of job descriptions in a second, it does make it easier. But just talking to people, asking them questions, because sometimes that motivation is not in a job description or written online. It's you speak to 5-10 people and they all are looking for a promotion or looking to make a positive difference in the world. And you'll see what are the 2-3 sentences that are repeated again and again. What are the goals they're looking to achieve? And right, if you could add the WIFM, the what's in it for me, right? If you could tell them as part of your brand story and building trust, this is how I'm going to help you achieve your goals. That's where you'll probably find the most success, right? So we defined our ICP. We know Sarah. We know, what was the other guy's name? Steve. So by the way, the reason we use names is because it's a lot easier to empathize with a name, with a real person, as opposed to right? You say a CISO or a CFO. But Sarah is someone I could empathize. I could think about.
Yeah.
On the slide, I at least put a picture of Sarah.
Sarah's my mom's name, so I can have that. Yeah, already I'm connecting with that.
I use my cousin's name. You brought up Sarah.
I know.
There you go. But right, I need to intimately know who, because if I don't know who I'm trying to build trust with, I can't even start. So it makes sense. And I really like that in your process, stage one is them.
Yeah.
Who are they? I'm not even looking at myself. You got no point to tell me what the company is. It doesn't matter.
Exactly.
Who's the audience? Who am I looking at? Because building trust is two people.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't know who the other person is, I can't even start. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so you've done that, and then you've also built out the let's call it the attention ecosystem, right? And you can use the sometimes I find it useful to use the peso model, the paid, earned, shared, owned. For those who don't know, it's a really good way of separating the different channels into different categories. And so paid is all of your paid activities, obviously, anything that you're paying for. Earned is, if you've got yourself a speaking opportunity at a conference for free, if you've secured yourself some PR, great. Shared is, it being shared on social media by others and or by partners. And owned is, everything that you manage, your newsletter, your website, whatever, your email database and campaigns. And so that peso model allows you to break down. The really important part of that, of being able to follow that and mapping their attention ecosystem by that, is then you avoid putting all of that eggs in one basket. And so if you have that 95-5 model where only 5% are out there to buy your product, but then you also map it against the peso model, then you're less likely to fall in the common trap, maybe from years gone by where there was a larger budget of, okay, I'm just going to put it all into paid campaigns, and then your campaigns get cut back and then you've got nothing left. So if you're thinking from that attention ecosystem, and then what I like to do is think of that bit of content, that way of storytelling. I personally love doing it through data. It's amazing because it gives you proprietary, authoritative ways of storytelling. But you think of that piece of content and think of that or one piece of content as a big rock. And I know you had recently someone saying a big rock.
Angie.
Angie was talking about a big rock. This is a big rock in this is one piece of content. It could be a guide. We're not talking 40-page guides here. We're talking still something that could be 2-3 pages, is super valuable. We're getting information and getting value as soon as they do it. It could be a blog post. It could be a webinar or a podcast. And you're putting all of your attention, all of your efforts into understanding what is it that you're talking about that they can get from that's going to give them the education, that's going to give them something to understand, to learn. And the best way of doing that, of knowing that, is because you've done the listening piece, right? When you hear repeatedly that there is this one thing that people are struggling with, right? If with Cyabra on many demo, people are saying, we're really struggling with Instagram and understanding how to identify fake accounts on Instagram. Okay, great. That's the piece of content that you need to hone in on, whatever it is that yours is. When I was at my supermarket, grocery comparison site, that helps people save money, and you're really trying to build trust. And so there was a B2C side, and then they monetized by B2B and data, working with consumers and sharing data, sharing trends about consumer behavior. And so there was this B2C and B2B. One of the best things we did was create this grocery trolley tracker. And so every month, and you worked as marketer, if you have access to data, then you have to make whoever is the gatekeeper of that data your best friend. And so the BI team that I was able to work with, and we created, what does an average monthly grocery trolley look like? What does it include? What items, what sizes, etc. And then every month, all we did was simply publish whether the price of that had gone up or gone down, and the products within it. Okay, so the overall basket had gone up by $2.80, £2.80. Okay, well, what are the biggest drivers? Carrots and eggs went up, and so that bit of content, whatever that content is for you, whatever thing people are struggling with and have that need, or whatever that pain point is. Again, it could be related to your product, but at this point, it still doesn't need to be in terms of establishing the trust. What you do is you focus all on that big rock. And you pour it all into there, not in terms of the quantity, but in terms of the quality. Really try and understand. And because you've done your listening, you should be better. However, the challenge is you actually now need to go a step further. You need to go a step further in terms of that audience. So if you need to pull in subject matter experts within the company, or subject matter experts that you've developed partnerships with, then you really need to understand them. Okay, you are going through a process of trying to almost be in your target audience's brain. And now if they've said it repeatedly on demos, then that's a good way of doing it. But trying to understand what is it their challenge, or what is it they need to solve in order to get that promotion, and then focus all your content on that big rock. And once you've done that, then you are able to firstly have that piece of information, turn it into a campaign, right? Marketing isn't saying 1,000 different things. It's saying one thing 1,000 different ways. And so you've mapped out their attention ecosystem, and you've turned this big rock into smaller chunks of content. So once you've got all your quality, and it's going to be good, and you gauge that by how much it's being shared, or if it's a tab that's open, that stays open on someone's screen, then that's going to be great. I personally don't believe in gating it. I try and gate as little as possible. You're trying to make it as valuable as possible, but then you're creating your little chunks of content, and you're making it in the format same content, same topic, same educational value, it's going to achieve with your target audience. You know it's going to resonate. But now you're creating content for your founder to be able to talk about that in their tone of voice. You're creating carousel slides for social media. You're creating paid LinkedIn campaigns. You're turning it into a pitch for the conference that's coming up, where you can now confidently say, this is something that you don't have on your agenda as a conference, because this is something that's coming around the corner. You need to have our speaker there. You need to have us there. And you turn it into as many different pieces of content for as many of those channels as possible. And crucially, it allows you to then focus just as much on the distribution as well. And if you do that enough times and you stay focused on your audience, and I don't mean do that enough times in terms of 2-3 years, you'll start to see the benefit. But if you do that enough times, you're going to see some benefits pretty much straight away. And that's what we saw as well. When we started focusing on, there was I'll give you an example of what we did. We saw that there was a particular boycott campaign against Nike. And we did some research about that conversation that had taken place on social media. This was last year. And we hadn't actually got to the paid or even that many of the channels, but we put it out on our channels, on our own channels of the peso model, the O. 2 days later, we had an inbound lead from Nike because we got their attention. And my aha moment of knowing this worked was when I was at my supermarket and we did this story on how products, again, the strategy for my supermarket was gaining the trust because we're on their side helping consumers save money. And so we did the story of how products are staying the same price but shrinking. And there's this shrinkflation trend, right. And you can't trust them. And so we were giving the data of which products. And it was around, I think it was around Easter eggs, right? That time of the year, all these chocolate companies created Easter eggs. My CEO was going into a meeting couple of weeks later with one of these big companies in order to try and sell them our insights analytics. And he came to me down the corridor with the almost front page news of the article that we had managed to secure about the story and said, what are you doing? Like, you've completely torpedoed this conversation. I'm going in. They're never going to want to speak to us because you've just trashed them. And I was like, firstly, it was the data that trashed them, right? They did it themselves. And I was like, okay, right, well, maybe we can work out a cadence so that I can know. 3 weeks later, he comes up to me. He said, Rafi, it was incredible. I walk into the meeting. It was a huge organization that had no right to know who we were as this smaller, scrappier startup. And the CEO said, have you guys heard of me, heard of us? I said, are you kidding? We've got our attention. Every one of us have read the article. We know that data came from you. You have our attention. So 3 weeks later, the CEO said, do more of that. We want to see more of that. So that's the big rock. You'll start to see all of that and you'll know if it's good, if it's being shared, if it's, if people are finding good value. At Cyabra, there's a couple of WhatsApp groups that I'm in of our target audience. And every now and then someone else, not who works at Cyabra, shares a blog piece or shares a bit of content. And someone says, oh, has everyone seen this? This is really interesting. The admin of the group, that's the best feeling of all. The admin of the group knows that I work for the company and then he tags me and says, oh, actually, if you have any questions. And then I get to swoop in and say, oh, thank you very much. I'm glad you found it of value. That's when you start to know that it's really, really working. But it has a really big impact in terms of obviously inbound, in terms of interest, in terms of all of the metrics that you're tracking across all of those channels, but you're starting with them in mind and what that pain point was, that education, and you're doing that, and we've done that to build trust, and that's worked incredibly well. That's it, really. Pretty simple to follow through. It's not just the theory of trust, but it's also how do we make that in terms of a workable, usable plan of action for marketers, and I think that's what I really wanted to make sure we go into today.
I'm curious. I think a lot of us do pieces of that in different ways. What point do you think really is what earns the trust? Like what makes us unique and really builds that trust?
I think it's that listening piece at the beginning. It's really hard for us as marketers to parachute into an organization that is working on a solution in a particular field. And as marketers, we're expected to wear lots of different hats and be good. And that is the muscle that we've developed. But on the other hand, we're not 20, 30-year veterans in this one particular industry or field or sector. And so I think a lot of the content, a lot of the marketing that comes across, for those who are the decision makers, they see right through that. Particularly in the, if we're talking about it in the context of trust, and particularly if we're talking about it in the ability to create so much content using AI, but it's, it's just, it's not necessarily full slop, but it's okay, so a marketer's created this, they don't know my world, and so the ability to listen, I think for those that matter, for those that make the decisions, they'll spot that and they'll be able to read between the lines. They'll be able to read and say, okay, this company is, they know what they're talking about. So therefore, either tomorrow they deserve more of my attention, or the next time I come across them, or when I'm looking for that solution, I'm in the market now to buy, and I want to raise my hand, or I'm more, responsive to outbound, or I've read more of their content, and so therefore someone's going to reach out and connect, or they're more likely to follow you on social media. All of those things that we're trying to optimize for, it flows from that, and not in a 2-3 years later. It flows immediately. Plus, the thing to focus on as well is now the hot thing that everyone's talking about in terms of geo. All of this supports that, because if you're able to then get that content out more and more, it's amazing. We noticed last year, because of all the content we put out, because of all the research and reports and educational and guides that we have focused on of Cyabra the last few years, that last year around 15% of all our inbound leads were quoting that they found first heard about us through the AI tools, through LLMs and search.
Wow.
And so our content's coming that. Even better is if you go to X and you search for Cyabra and you click the latest tab, the Grok is now on topics that we're not involved in, are quoting us and our research in answers in multiple languages on various different topics, that when people are asking about bots and disinformation, and then Grok is then coming back to them saying, well,
According to Cyabra research,
and here's the link, and it's presenting us as the authority. That's the holy grail of what everyone's searching for right now. But it was that content wheel, that content machine,
right,
that we have spent the last 3-4 years focusing on, that has allowed us to do that.
And it also sounds like by using the data that only you guys have and putting out that into the world, I think as marketers, we kind of will take the same information and give it a lot of different colors and different, or we'll give a unique take to something. I think that you guys have data that's unique and that you could tell a story through that data. I think people are thirsty for something new. And if we're talking about trust, is telling me a story about something or a perspective about something, okay, I could take it, but raw data, that's a lot, both in a supermarket setting or in a disinformation startup setting. Very different, but still, you're using the information you have to tell a story that is very hard to debate, and then you become the authority for that topic.
Completely. And I recognize that I'm incredibly lucky, right? I've worked at companies where there's full of data. The challenge is getting hold of it, and then the challenge is kind of then preparing it and making sure it's clean, it's reliable. Not all marketers have that access.
Right.
Yeah, if you do, then go for it. You absolutely, everything you can possibly do to get access to it and to refine it, and work with an analyst if you need to, but it's also, you can then put it into Claude and to Gemini and get insights from that. It's easier than ever. If you don't have access to data, easily access to data, there's the kind of tried and tested from the PR world of running surveys and asking people's opinion, and the bar for that is pretty low. You don't have to ask thousands of people. It's very easy to actually put a couple of questions into like a wider survey that costs a few $100. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be long in terms of the time it takes. And then there's also been loads of great examples, right? You had Eitan on the podcast who gave examples of things that they had scraped data from jobs boards of large companies in order to present that back as a trend. It's kind of data led, but it's not really. It's very creative. So there's lots of different ways you can do that. But if you're starting from the beginning point of how can I make this as valuable, as educational, as relevant to the pain points of our target audience, and you go through that process, then it might not work every single time, every single piece of content or every story you do, but it will work, and it really worked the majority of the time, and you're going to see huge benefits. Plus, there's huge advantages if you are able or in a position to kind of champion this approach internally, because you will then have huge amounts of information that you can feed back, right? Everyone says marketers should be the voice of the customer, and then you've been putting more efforts in the resources in that. And then also it takes you away from fascinating and overly focusing on a specific channel and a specific metric. You're looking at it as a whole, The sentence I've said many times to my CEO is you don't measure your bicep every single time you go to the gym, right? And that kind of
Right.
more of a strategic approach of looking at lots of different channels and lots of different topics allows you to be able to focus both the marketing team, but also the whole company on, okay, this is what's working. Plus, you're then giving all these materials for your sales team to be able to follow up with the customer success. The best kind of way I've seen it, or the way that we've tried to do it, is recording those calls with the sales team and with the customer success, and then having the AI kind of understand what their pain points is, feed that into marketing. We'll use AI content tools. We are putting in the prompts and understanding what the needs are, and then also making sure that nothing goes out with us seeing it. But that kind of bit in between, or a lot of the legwork, is incredibly important. Imagine you have someone on customer success who's in a call with a customer who's talking about a particular challenge, either around your solution or just generally, and then that goes straight to the marketing team, automated. You have an ability to create content, and then 48 hours, that same customer success person can go back and say, hey, we spoke about the challenge of identifying fake accounts on Instagram. Well, actually, I just thought you would want to see that we've got this 2-page guide on exactly how to do that. Imagine what that would do in terms of the relationship of the customer. And we have the ability to do that, but it's about putting them first, which sounds so obvious, is everything that we're all trying to strive for, but can be hard to be able to engineer the space for us to be able to do that, unless you have that kind of model and that approach of being able to do that for that reason.
It also makes sense that with trust, you could build the best trust in the world, but then if the sales guy gets on they could ruin that in a second. So it needs to be continuous, right? Look, you could also have the best story. They buy the product, then product is crap. Also, you lose his trust. So trust needs to be continuous, and it can't be siloed into marketing alone. Yes, you may be the first touch point, but you want to create trust across the board.
Absolutely. And you need to really, as much as you possibly can, and there'll be people listening to this who are senior marketers and have all the sway, and there are people who are junior marketers and say, well, what can I possibly do in my role? Absolutely. You can be only responsible for the things that you're responsible for, and as much as you can. But then by creating that valuable educational materials, the thing that is authoritative, it can be used by other people in the organizations, like we mentioned, the customer success partners as well love that kind of stuff, because if they're working with a few different technology companies, the ones that are coming out with educational materials or with all of these resources that is good and not just kind of slop, they're going to love working with you more than the other companies they work with.
That's kind of the benefit in marketing, that whatever your role or title, you're creating content. And if your content is resonating and bringing in those numbers, no one cares what your title is. You're the guy that brings the numbers, and you just shoot up from there because you have that control. And right, like there's no one stopping you. So even if you don't have the big title, I think you could still use this methodology to build trust and create awesome things that drive results.
And I think the next kind of, I know this is going to sound big idea and sound kind of grand and sound like I know what I'm talking about, and I really don't. It's the accent that makes it sound like that. But I think for that next generation is the wrong word, but the kind of marketers that are going to win are the ones who are able to understand both the execution tactics, but also the kind of psychology behind it, right? Data tells us that if we buy lots and lots of lists of our potential audience email addresses and we send them out, then a certain percentage is going to convert. Best practice and psychology and trust building tells us that that's probably one of the quickest ways that you could burn any type of trust that you have now or could potentially have in the future. And so, knowing that and kind of internalizing that as marketers is going to be incredibly important. And those that are able to do that and are able to have that conversation internally, being like, well, we could do that, but what harm is that going to cause? That's a really hard conversation to have, because we have the data of why it would work, but we don't always have the data of why it won't work. So in that dynamic, it's like, well, give me the data, prove it. And that's often the environment we're in. But if we're coming from that point of, okay, we're going to burn all that trust that we want to achieve, then that gives you that, hopefully that gives you that tool to be able to do it. So hopefully this is just as much practical as it is theoretical.
I like that there's both, because I think many of us do a lot of the stages that you mentioned, but kind of having trust, like I would never quantify what I do as building trust. That being said, a lot of the methodologies that you mentioned are things I do. And I don't know why, but trust is what I'm looking to achieve.
Mhm.
I want people to trust me as a marketer, me as a brand, me as a company, because that's what leads to sale. That's a groundwork for sales. If you don't have that, if they don't trust you, there is no conversation.
Yeah, and maybe as marketers, we are. What's the expression? The shoemaker who goes shoeless. Maybe as marketers, we're just not good at packaging that.
Mm.
So maybe the trick is just to add the word growth or sales. If you want to go back internally and say, guys, I've got this trust-led growth approach or trust-led sales approach, then it's going to sound less brand. As soon as you as soon as you use those kind of words of brand, then it's like, oh, yeah, talking about in 2 years' time. We're talking about now, yalla. But actually, maybe just add the word growth or sales to it, and then we'll be away.
It sounds like a plan. So, Rafi, before we go, give our listeners a recap of the trust content wheel. What are the quick stages to sum things up?
Sure. So you want to really define and narrow your ICP. Then you want to learn everything you can possibly about them by listening. Really try and ask those questions and understand them as a profession, not necessarily them as a person, and map that out and really understand their attention ecosystem. Really try and understand the pain points, and then build out the content by starting with that big piece, that big rock, and understand and make it as valuable and quality as possible, and then break it down into little chunks of a rock that you can then focus on the distribution across all of the different channels that you've established that they live in. And you do that enough times and you are going to win.
Easier said than done, my friend. Rafi, thank you so much for coming by. Before we go, I do want to thank Google for Startups, who host us regularly. If you do have a very early startup, something that Rafi likes to be a part of, Google actually gives you a lot of resources to build things up. And there's a community and a place to hang out here and an office space. So check out Google for Startups. I want to thank our producers who make us look good and cut out all the the weird things we say. Rotem Simon, who's here, Shachar Kedar, and Atara Levy help us out. GCMO are always great. Rafi, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate the trust in us.